A bitter January wind swept harshly across the marble steps of the Manhattan Criminal Courthouse, biting into the skin of anyone unfortunate enough to linger outside. Despite the brutal cold that gripped New York City, the courthouse bustled with typical Monday morning energy, oblivious to winter's harsh greeting. Meteorologists had called this the coldest day in years, with temperatures plunging to 14 degrees Fahrenheit, freezing even the busiest sidewalks into silence. Inside, Judge James Callahan sat quietly behind his polished oak desk, methodically reviewing the docket of the day's scheduled cases. The New York County Criminal Court never slowed down, and today was no different. Yet among dozens of pending files, one seemingly minor case drew his attention, a petty theft involving a homeless man named Robert Sullivan. Charged with dine-and-dash at a downtown diner and a minor clothing theft, Sullivan faced relatively minor consequences. The victims themselves suggested leniency, as it seemed the crimes were motivated purely by desperation. Judge Callahan, "The first case is ready," his clerk, Sarah, announced gently through the slightly open door. John Callahan rose from his desk, gathering his robe carefully, and made his way to the courtroom, his dignified presence filling the narrow hallway. Entering the courtroom, Callahan glanced around briefly. Prosecutor Martin Davis and Public Defender Jessica Foster stood respectfully, their files neatly stacked before them. The gallery was sparsely filled, a few curious spectators braving the cold to witness the minor drama unfolding today. Within moments, the courtroom doors swung open again, revealing the defendant. Sullivan, frail and hunched, shuffled slowly forward, led carefully by the bailiff. His thin coat, stained and worn, hung loosely around his shoulders. Gray-haired and gaunt, Sullivan's sunken cheeks and hollow eyes spoke volumes about years of hardship endured on unforgiving city streets. Judge Callahan instinctively examined Sullivan's face closely as the elderly man took his seat. Suddenly, a strange sense of unease stirred deep within him. Sullivan nervously touched his right eye repeatedly, as if uncomfortable, a familiar gesture that resonated deeply in Callahan's memory. Beneath Sullivan's right eye, the skin was visibly scarred, hollowed, suggesting old injuries or surgery. The sight triggered an immediate, powerful flashback. Callahan felt his heart skip painfully. The courtroom, lawyers, and the bitter winter day vanished abruptly as memories rushed forward, memories long hidden, buried under decades of grief and unanswered questions. He was 9 years old again, standing helplessly as his father frantically tried to wipe away the glue that had accidentally splashed into his right eye while repairing John's broken toy airplane. That accident had left his father permanently injured, blind in one eye, and with a visibly sunken cheek from the surgeries that followed. The striking similarity between that distant memory and the elderly man before him shook Callahan deeply, forcing him to grip the gavel tightly, steadying himself against the sudden wave of dizziness. Swallowing hard, Callahan drew himself back to the present moment, regaining his composure with practiced discipline. He spoke with careful, practiced calmness. "Mr. Sullivan, have you reviewed and understood the charges brought against you?" "Yes, Your Honor," Sullivan responded, voice weak and shaky, eyes lowered to avoid the judge's penetrating gaze. But Callahan had already seen enough. Something in his gut told him the unimaginable truth. This destitute, weary soul standing accused in his courtroom might actually be his own father, missing from his life for nearly 4 decades. He forced himself to push emotion aside, at least temporarily, resuming the professional tone he'd mastered over 18 years on the bench. The prosecutor, Martin Reynolds, described Sullivan's crimes succinctly, his tone detached yet firm. The defendant knowingly consumed a meal worth approximately $5 at Jake's Diner on January 23rd without paying. 2 days later, on January 25th, Mr. Sullivan attempted to steal thermal underwear, valued at $20, from a nearby clothing store. When questioned by authorities, Mr. Sullivan cited hunger and extreme cold as motivation. Callahan listened closely, but his attention drifted repeatedly back to Sullivan, each word echoing painfully with haunting resonance. His rational mind battled fiercely against an aching, visceral desire to rush from the bench, confront this man directly, demand to know whether he was truly his father. "I'm sorry, Your Honor," Sullivan murmured quietly, humiliation evident. "I hadn't eaten in days, and shelters were full. I was desperate." An uncomfortable silence gripped the courtroom. Callahan wrestled internally, torn between professional duty and a fierce, personal need to uncover the truth. He'd spent decades wondering, mourning the inexplicable absence of his father. Now, fate cruelly presented this possibility, wrapped in tragedy and heartache. Prosecutor Reynolds rose confidently, calling for incarceration. "Your Honor," though minor, these were deliberate, repeated acts that undermine public trust. The state requests a sentence of 6 months incarceration. Public Defender Allison Reed immediately countered. "Judge, Mr. Sullivan has no prior convictions. He's suffering from severe mental illness, specifically schizophrenia, untreated due to homelessness. Punishment won't solve the underlying issue. He urgently needs treatment and support, not incarceration." Callahan struggled beneath his professional mask, his emotions surging powerfully. The defense attorney's words resonated deeply. Untreated mental illness, homelessness. Could these circumstances explain his father's disappearance all those years ago? Taking a deep, unsteady breath, Callahan finally addressed Sullivan, his voice betraying a slight tremor. "Mr. Sullivan, do you have any final statements?" Sullivan looked up hesitantly, his one good eye pleading softly. "I'm sorry, Your Honor. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I just wanted to survive." The simplicity and raw honesty of the statement pierced through Callahan's practiced composure. He swallowed hard, unable to immediately respond. "We'll take a brief recess," Callahan managed, quickly rising from his seat, voice wavering slightly. "Court will reconvene in 15 minutes. Swiftly retreating to his chambers, Callahan collapsed into his chair, overwhelmed by emotions he'd spent a lifetime suppressing. Tears stung his eyes as memories flooded him once again. His father's abrupt disappearance, his mother's tearful, fruitless explanations, and his own agonizing loneliness. It had taken years of determination and pain to overcome the scars left by abandonment, scars reopened instantly upon seeing Sullivan. But Callahan knew he couldn't afford to lose control. Not here, not now. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out an old, faded family photograph. His thumb brushed across his father's face, the image worn by decades of grief and longing. Could the elderly man standing accused in his courtroom truly be the father he'd lost so long ago? And if so, how could Callahan remain impartial? How could he deliver justice fairly while confronting the man whose absence had shaped his entire life? A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts once more. "Your Honor, recess has ended. The court is ready to reconvene," the clerk announced softly. "Thank you. I'll be right there." Callahan responded quietly, rising slowly from his chair, steeling himself once more. As he walked back toward the courtroom, Callahan's mind raced, his heart weighed heavily by uncertainty, pain, and cautious hope. Today, he realized, was not simply about judging another man's guilt or innocence. Today was about facing the deepest wound of his own life, confronting a truth that had eluded him for nearly 4 decades. Returning to the courtroom, Judge Callahan's heart beat rapidly, yet outwardly, he maintained the composed presence he'd perfected over nearly 20 years on the bench. He felt every gaze fixed upon him as he took his seat, the weight of expectations pressing heavily on his shoulders. Clearing his throat gently, he forced himself to face the frail defendant again, Robert Sullivan, whose nervous movements revealed deep shame and anxiety. "Mr. Sullivan," Callahan began, maintaining steady eye contact, "your circumstances have been carefully weighed. While it is clear your actions constitute violations of law, the court must consider your motivation and condition." He paused, noticing Sullivan's shoulders trembling slightly. His voice softened almost imperceptibly as he continued, "Given the evidence provided, your lack of prior offenses, and the underlying mental health conditions clearly contributing to your behavior, incarceration seems neither productive nor just." Prosecutor Mackenzie watched closely, clearly anticipating the direction of the ruling. Public Defender Allison Reed's expression was hopeful yet cautious. Sullivan merely lowered his eyes, preparing himself for whatever came next. Callahan took a breath, steadying the tremor in his voice. "Therefore, the court sentences you to 6 months imprisonment, suspended, contingent upon successful completion of 1 year supervised probation. Additionally, you will complete 200 hours of community service and mandatory psychiatric treatment. Do you understand, Mr. Sullivan?" The elderly man looked up sharply, eyes widened in surprise, voice cracking slightly with relief. "Yes, Your Honor. I understand." Callahan felt an inexplicable tightness in his chest as Sullivan spoke, his voice triggering a distant memory, late-night stories told softly by his bedside, a voice he thought he'd forgotten. The courtroom gradually emptied as people filed out, the murmurs fading slowly. Sullivan stood, hesitating at first, then looked up to catch Callahan's gaze again briefly. In that fleeting moment, a deep recognition passed silently between them, charged with decades of lost connection. Sullivan's eyes quickly flickered away, as if afraid to acknowledge what he, too, must surely have sensed. After court, Callahan retreated immediately to his chambers. Heart pounding fiercely, he picked up Sullivan's file again, carefully reviewing every line. The details matched: age, occupation, injury. Sullivan had mentioned previously working aboard Alaskan fishing vessels, exactly the rumor his mother had often mentioned, uncertainly, as she struggled to explain her husband's disappearance. Callahan's hands trembled as he placed the file down, reality crashing down upon him. There was little room left for doubt. This man, fragile, broken, accused of petty theft, was indeed his long-lost father. Driven by a powerful need for answers, Callahan left the courthouse early, heading toward the shelter listed in Sullivan's file, a small, nondescript facility in Midtown, a place he'd passed countless times without a second glance. It was late afternoon, and the winter sun cast long shadows as he approached. Snow crunched softly beneath his feet, his breath misting visibly in the cold. Reaching the building's entrance, he felt anxiety grip him. Could he truly confront the truth? Was he ready? He ascended narrow stairs to the top floor, where a faint glow seeped from under a crooked door. Inside, someone coughed softly, the sound eerily familiar. Gathering courage, Callahan knocked lightly. "Yes." Sullivan's wary voice responded from within. "It's Judge Callahan. May I come in?" A pause, then slow footsteps shuffled toward the door, which opened cautiously. Sullivan appeared in the doorway, startled, face pale. "Your Honor? Is everything all right?" Callahan gently held up a reassuring hand. "Everything's fine. I just needed to talk to you privately, Mr. Sullivan." The old man stepped aside, allowing Callahan inside the small room, tidy but sparse, a thin mattress on a metal frame, a tiny table holding only essentials. Sullivan motioned awkwardly toward a worn chair, embarrassment clear on his face. "Please sit down, Your Honor. It's not much, but it's home." Callahan sat quietly, trying to steady himself before speaking. After a brief silence, he began carefully. Mr. Sullivan, earlier in court, I noticed your injury, your right eye. Could you tell me how that happened? Sullivan's good eye widened, visibly startled. His shoulders tensed, and for a moment, he seemed unable to speak. Then, haltingly, he answered, Many years ago, there was an accident. Chemical glue got in my eye. Doctors did surgery, but I never fully recovered. Callahan felt tears stinging his eyes, struggling to maintain composure. Can I ask, how did that accident happen? Sullivan hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. I was fixing a toy airplane for my son. A careless accident, really. It haunted me forever. At that moment, all doubt vanished. Callahan's heart slammed painfully against his ribs. His voice broke slightly, whispering, What was your son's name? Sullivan froze, eyes widening in shock. He swallowed hard, voice trembling.
Johnny.
My boy's name was Johnny. Time seemed to stop entirely in that small room, silence stretching between them like fragile ice. Tears slid silently down Callahan's cheeks, a lifetime of pain and confusion crystallizing into one emotional instant. Finally, he spoke quietly, voice trembling.
Dad, it's me.
It's Johnny. Sullivan froze completely, his good eye wide with shock, breath catching sharply. What? Johnny. His voice cracked, disbelief and joy clashing violently within it. That's impossible. It can't be. Callahan slowly stood, carefully stepping closer. His voice was tender, reassuring. It's true, Dad. After you disappeared, Mom and I searched everywhere. She always believed you'd return someday. I always hoped, but eventually I stopped believing. Sullivan's legs weakened beneath him, and Callahan quickly moved to steady him. They sat side by side on the narrow cot, father and son, separated for decades by misunderstanding and illness, finally reunited. I never dreamed, Sullivan whispered, voice cracking painfully. Johnny, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this life. I never meant to leave you. But I was sick, Johnny. I was losing control, hearing voices, terrified I'd harm you or your mother. I believed leaving would protect you both. Callahan squeezed his father's hand reassuringly, his voice soft yet firm. You don't have to explain anymore, Dad. I finally understand. Mental illness stole you from us, but now we have a chance to rebuild. Sullivan nodded weakly, visibly overwhelmed, tears flowing freely. Johnny, I don't deserve your forgiveness. You don't have to deserve it, Callahan responded gently. You're my father. That fact never changed. Not then, not now. The winter evening slowly descended upon Manhattan, darkness wrapping the city gently. In that humble shelter room, however, warmth filled every corner. Father and son sitting together after nearly 40 years, silently healing wounds once believed incurable. Callahan finally stood, steadying himself. Dad, tonight you're leaving this place behind. You're coming home with me. Tomorrow we'll see a doctor, get you proper treatment, and begin again. I promise. I won't lose you again. Sullivan looked up, eyes shimmering with hope, his voice barely audible. Johnny, I never thought anyone would find me worthy again, especially you. But I promise I won't let you down. Not this time. Callahan smiled warmly, reaching out to embrace his father tightly. As they held each other, decades of grief melted gently away. Outside, New York's lights twinkled softly, snowfall returning quietly, gently blanketing the city, a fresh start to match the new chapter father and son were ready to write together. That night, Judge Callahan brought his father home through snow-lined streets illuminated by soft amber streetlights. Manhattan was quiet, the city muffled beneath a fresh layer of snow. Robert Sullivan sat beside him in the passenger seat, gazing out the window with a mix of disbelief and wonder, eyes wide with a quiet, childlike awe. Callahan glanced toward him occasionally, reassuring himself that this surreal moment was real, not merely a fleeting dream. His mind swirled with thoughts of what lay ahead: medical appointments, therapies, conversations long overdue, and countless moments they'd need to reclaim from a past that had nearly vanished. Arriving at Callahan's apartment building, Sullivan hesitated at the elegant marble entryway, suddenly self-conscious about his shabby coat and weathered appearance. "Johnny, maybe I shouldn't," Sullivan began uncertainly. Callahan gently placed a reassuring hand on his father's shoulder. "Dad, you belong here. This is your home now." Inside the spacious apartment, warm lamplight illuminated comfortable furniture, walls lined neatly with books, symbols of the structured life Callahan had built from years of loneliness and determination. Sullivan paused at the threshold, his eyes drifting slowly across the room, drinking in every detail as if memorizing something he feared might vanish. "Welcome home," Callahan whispered softly. Overwhelmed, Sullivan sank onto the edge of the sofa, his eyes misting as they gazed at a photograph on the mantel, a faded image of Callahan as a child, holding his mother's hand. "Your mother," Sullivan murmured softly, his voice choked with regret. "She was so gentle, so strong. I wish she could see you now." Callahan sat quietly beside him, speaking gently. "She always believed you'd come back one day. She never stopped loving you. Even after all those years, she'd look at your picture and talk as though you were still right beside us." Sullivan's shoulders shook slightly, the weight of lost time suddenly too heavy to bear. "I thought leaving would protect you both, Johnny. But I just ended up hurting everyone more." "You were ill, Dad," Callahan reminded gently. "You didn't choose mental illness. It chose you. But now we have another chance. Let's take it." Sullivan looked up, a fragile glimmer of hope appearing in his tired eyes. "You think I can be better? After all these years?" Callahan nodded firmly.
Yes.
"We'll do whatever it takes together." Early the next morning, the city awoke beneath clear winter skies. Callahan had scheduled an appointment at Mount Sinai Hospital's mental health clinic, ensuring Sullivan received immediate psychiatric care. As they drove uptown, sunlight reflected brilliantly off the fresh snow, illuminating Sullivan's pale face, etched with both anxiety and cautious optimism. At the clinic, Dr. Rebecca Thompson greeted them warmly. She was gentle yet direct, carefully assessing Sullivan's condition and listening patiently to his halting explanations about the voices and paranoia that had tormented him for decades. "Mr. Sullivan," Dr. Thompson said gently, "what you're describing is consistent with schizophrenia. Untreated, it can disrupt your perceptions of reality severely, but with medication and therapy, your symptoms can be greatly managed. You can regain your life." Sullivan's eyes filled with tears, his voice trembling. "I thought I'd lost myself completely. I never thought there'd be hope again." "There is always hope," Dr. Thompson replied, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Especially now." Leaving the hospital later that morning, Sullivan held tightly to the small bag containing his new medications, his lifeline toward a better future. "I never imagined that someone like me could ever be helped," Sullivan said softly, as they walked slowly through Central Park's snow-covered paths. "I spent years believing I deserved my fate. Being homeless felt like punishment." "You deserved compassion, Dad, not punishment," Callahan answered softly, placing a supportive hand on his father's back. "We can't change the past, but now we have a future together." In the following days, Callahan took leave from court duties, choosing to prioritize Sullivan's adjustment. He witnessed, day by day, Small miracles unfold. Sullivan's sleep improved, his appetite returned, and the cloud of confusion gradually lifted, replaced by quiet clarity and renewed strength. Still, there were moments of difficulty, nights when Sullivan would awake confused, calling out from nightmares shaped by decades of fear and isolation. Each time, Callahan patiently reassured him, gently guiding his father back toward calmness, anchoring him in their newfound bond. One afternoon, Callahan arranged Sullivan's community service at a senior center near Hell's Kitchen, a place dedicated to helping vulnerable elderly residents. Sullivan initially hesitated, feeling ashamed, but Callahan reassured him firmly. "Dad, you have a lifetime of wisdom and strength. Sharing it with others who've also suffered loneliness and hardship might heal you, too." Tentatively, Sullivan began his first day helping residents, serving meals, reading to those with poor eyesight, offering quiet companionship. At first nervous, Sullivan quickly found purpose, his gentle empathy resonating deeply with the elderly men and women he assisted. "They see me as a person, Johnny," Sullivan whispered emotionally one evening. "For the first time in decades, someone looked at me without pity or disgust. They thanked me for helping." "You always deserved dignity, Dad," Callahan said warmly, proud and moved. "It was the world that failed you, not the other way around." Evenings brought quiet conversations between father and son as they slowly filled in lost decades. Sullivan listened quietly, tears often in his eyes, as Callahan described growing up in foster care, the struggles after his mother's death, and the kindness of Dr. Arthur Callahan, the pediatrician who adopted him and encouraged his dreams of becoming a lawyer and eventually a judge. "I owe him my life," Callahan admitted softly one night, "but I never stopped missing you." Sullivan reached across the table, grasping Callahan's hand tightly. "Johnny, I regret missing your life more deeply than anything. I can't change that. But now, every moment forward counts. And I promise to be there." A peaceful silence followed, both men acknowledging the fragility and strength contained within those promises. Slowly, the pain of the past began giving way to something brighter, deeper, a foundation built on forgiveness and understanding. Later, alone in his room, Sullivan carefully took out the faded photograph Callahan had placed by his bedside, a picture of their family taken so many years before. He stared at the happy faces, eyes misting with longing and gratitude. "I'll make it right, Mary," Sullivan whispered softly to his late wife's gentle smile. "I'll honor you and Johnny. I promise I won't fail again." Down the hall, Callahan lay awake, quietly processing the events of the past days. Outside, the city lights sparkled softly through frosted windows, winter's chill unable to penetrate the warmth filling their home. He closed his eyes, allowing himself finally to relax. His family, once painfully fractured, had begun to heal. A second chance, fragile but real, had begun to take root. As sleep finally claimed him, Callahan knew challenges would lie ahead, yet he felt certain that, together, they would overcome them. After decades spent searching, mourning, and longing, both father and son had found something once thought forever lost, a chance at redemption, peace, and the family they had always deserved. Weeks passed, and the deep freeze of January gradually yielded to a softer, quieter February snowfall. Inside Judge John Callahan's apartment, a comforting new rhythm took hold. Robert Sullivan steadily adjusted, the medications bringing clarity and peace to a mind long tormented by confusion and despair. Each morning, Callahan awoke early to find Sullivan already in the kitchen, brewing coffee, preparing toast, savoring small routines once lost to him. Though still frail, Sullivan now moved with quiet confidence, dignity slowly returning to his bearing. Today, as they sat down to breakfast, Sullivan seemed particularly thoughtful, eyes distant yet clear. "Johnny," Sullivan began quietly, setting his cup down carefully. "I've been thinking about the people I left behind. I wonder how many others like me still wander the streets, unheard, unseen, forgotten." Callahan glanced at his father with gentle curiosity. "You're thinking about helping?" "Yes," Sullivan replied softly, voice earnest. "I've spent so many years as a ghost, ignored by everyone. But now, because of you, I've found a second chance. I want others to find hope too." Callahan felt pride welling in his chest, moved by his father's growing strength and compassion. "Then let's find a way." A few days later, Callahan arranged a meeting with a local nonprofit dedicated to helping the homeless access mental health care. Its founder, Michael Reed, welcomed them warmly, recognizing immediately the value Sullivan's story could hold. "We desperately need voices like yours, Mr. Sullivan," Reed said sincerely. "Too many homeless individuals suffer from untreated mental illnesses. Your journey could inspire and advocate for real change." Sullivan hesitated, feeling the weight of responsibility, but nodded resolutely. "Whatever I can do, I'll do it." Within days, Sullivan began volunteering alongside Reed's team, visiting shelters and street corners he once haunted himself, reaching out with quiet compassion to those who struggled as he once had. At first shy, Sullivan gradually opened up, sharing his experiences gently, authentically, encouraging those who suffered silently to seek help. Every evening, he returned home visibly moved, humbled by his interactions. One night, he sat quietly with Callahan, eyes moist with tears. "I met someone today, Johnny," Sullivan began softly. "A young man named Chris, barely 25, homeless, terrified, hearing voices just like I did. I told him my story, and he finally agreed to get help. He thanked me, Johnny."
Me.
Callahan's voice filled with emotion. "Your story has power, Dad. Your suffering has purpose now. You're helping others find their way out of the darkness." Sullivan nodded slowly, eyes reflecting newfound determination. Maybe all that pain meant something after all. Maybe I survived so I could help someone else survive too. Days turned into weeks, and Sullivan's involvement grew deeper, becoming a respected voice among those fighting homelessness in New York City. He spoke publicly for the first time at a small advocacy event, his voice shaking but powerful, sincerity resonating deeply with listeners. Callahan stood quietly in the back, heart swelling with pride and emotion as he watched his father bravely share his painful story. Afterward, audience members approached Sullivan with gratitude, inspired by his honesty and vulnerability. Later, walking home through the quiet streets, Sullivan paused, glancing upward as snowflakes began drifting gently around them. "Johnny," he murmured thoughtfully, "a year ago, snow meant only suffering and cold. But now it feels different, peaceful, like a fresh start." Callahan smiled gently, placing an arm around his father's shoulder. "It's your fresh start, Dad. You deserve every bit of it." Still, the path to healing wasn't always smooth. At times, Sullivan struggled with anxiety or deep sadness, haunted by memories he'd suppressed for decades. Callahan patiently stood beside him during those moments, quietly reassuring him that his struggles were valid, his healing genuine, and his place in their lives secure. One particularly difficult night, Sullivan awoke from a nightmare, calling out in distress. Callahan quickly entered, finding his father trembling and disoriented. "It's okay, Dad," Callahan whispered gently, sitting beside him on the bed. "I'm here. You're safe." Sullivan slowly calmed, tears welling. "I dreamed I lost you again, Johnny. That everything good disappeared again." "You haven't lost me," Callahan replied softly. You never will again. Sullivan clung to Callahan's hand, whispering softly, voice breaking, Sometimes, I still don't feel worthy of this second chance. The guilt is overwhelming. Callahan squeezed his hand reassuringly, voice firm yet tender. You don't have to earn your place here, Dad. You're my father. That alone makes you worthy. You're home now. In quieter moments, Sullivan spent hours rediscovering simple pleasures, reading quietly in sunlight, savoring hot meals prepared together, or walking slowly through Central Park, marveling at the beauty he'd ignored during his long, painful exile. One afternoon, father and son paused on a snowy park bench, watching families laughing and children playing nearby. Sullivan spoke softly, voice gentle yet regretful. I miss so much, Johnny. Your childhood, your achievements. All those years lost. I can't ever get them back. Callahan placed a comforting hand on his father's shoulder, his voice deeply earnest. Those years can't be reclaimed, Dad. But we can honor them now by living fully, every single day. The past shaped us, but we don't have to carry its weight forever. Sullivan nodded, quietly accepting that truth. I just want you to know how deeply sorry I am. Every day, I wish I could have been there. I know, Dad. Callahan replied gently. I forgive you. Mom would forgive you too. Now, you just need to forgive yourself. Evening fell gently across Manhattan, winter's darkness softened by twinkling lights reflected through snow-covered branches. Sullivan watched quietly from the window later that night, reflecting deeply on their journey. A feeling of profound gratitude filled him, gratitude for his son's forgiveness, gratitude for the second chance he'd been given. Nearby, Callahan sat quietly reading. Sensing Sullivan's quiet introspection, he looked up, smiling warmly. What are you thinking, Dad? Callahan asked softly. Sullivan smiled gently, his voice quiet, yet deeply sincere. I was thinking about how much stronger we've become because of everything we've overcome. About how lucky I am to have you. Callahan smiled softly, quietly moved. We're lucky to have each other. Late into the evening, father and son shared quiet conversations, laughter, and comfortable silence, building new memories together. Memories of healing, connection, and unconditional love. Outside, Manhattan quietly rested beneath a fresh blanket of snow, peaceful and beautiful. Inside their apartment, something even warmer filled the space, a sense of home, family, and belonging. The past would always remain a part of them, but its power had finally diminished, replaced by something far stronger, the shared understanding that they were no longer defined by what was lost, but rather by the love and forgiveness they had found. As winter softened into early spring, Manhattan gradually came alive again, shaking off months of snow and bitter cold. The thaw seemed to mirror Robert Sullivan's journey. A slow but steady rebirth unfolding quietly within Judge Callahan's apartment. Each passing week brought visible change, not only to Sullivan's frail body, but to his spirit, gradually mending wounds once thought beyond repair. Morning routines settled into comfortable familiarity. Callahan would wake early to find Sullivan already sipping coffee at the kitchen table, sometimes quietly reading, other times gazing contemplatively at the bustling city streets below. They talked openly now, conversations flowing naturally as trust deepened between them. One bright February morning, as warm sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, Sullivan stirred his coffee thoughtfully, breaking the gentle silence. Johnny, Sullivan began, voice measured yet tender, I think I'd like to do more at the senior center. There are others still trapped by the life I escaped, homelessness, untreated illness, fear. Maybe my experiences can help. Callahan nodded encouragingly, proud of his father's determination. They'll benefit from your story, Dad. Your courage can inspire them, just as you've inspired me. Within days, Sullivan expanded his volunteer work at the senior center, gradually becoming an indispensable figure there. His gentle presence resonated deeply, especially among those who had endured similar hardships. Each evening, Sullivan returned home visibly moved, sharing stories with quiet humility. One evening after dinner, Sullivan spoke quietly, visibly emotional. "Today I spoke to a woman named Grace. She's homeless, schizophrenic, living exactly as I once did. We talked for hours. By the end, she agreed to visit a doctor. She thanked me, Johnny, said nobody had ever spoken to her like she mattered." Callahan felt his throat tighten, pride and affection swelling. "That's because you showed her dignity, Dad. The same dignity you always deserved but rarely received." Sullivan nodded slowly, voice gentle. "I realized something important today. When I was homeless, what hurt most wasn't the cold or hunger. It was invisibility, feeling unseen, worthless. If I can give others visibility, then everything I suffered gains meaning." Moved deeply, Callahan reached across the table, gripping Sullivan's hand. "You're giving back humanity, Dad. Nothing could matter more." Still, recovery wasn't always smooth. Some nights, shadows from the past returned. Dreams so vivid they'd wake Sullivan trembling, lost momentarily to memories of confusion and pain. One particularly difficult night, Callahan awoke to sounds of distress. Entering Sullivan's room quickly, he found his father sitting upright, visibly shaken. "Dad," Callahan whispered gently, sitting beside him. "Another nightmare?" Sullivan nodded, breathing deeply to steady himself. "I dreamed I was back on those Alaskan fishing boats, storms raging, voices screaming. I felt trapped again, helpless." "You're safe now," Callahan reassured quietly. "You're not alone anymore." Sullivan nodded slowly, voice trembling slightly. "Sometimes, Johnny, I fear slipping backward, losing everything again." "You won't," Callahan replied firmly. "I'm here, Dad. We're stronger together." Each moment of vulnerability deepened their bond. Callahan saw, perhaps for the first time clearly, the raw courage his father possessed, facing fears daily, choosing each morning to step forward rather than retreat. As spring approached, Sullivan's strength grew steadily, his presence increasingly integral at the senior center. One afternoon, Callahan stopped by unexpectedly, quietly observing Sullivan interacting warmly with residents, laughter and gentle affection flowing easily. "You must be so proud," remarked Angela Carter, the center's director, standing quietly beside him. "Your father has changed countless lives here." Callahan smiled softly, eyes warm with pride. "He's changing mine, too." Afterward, walking slowly through Central Park together, father and son paused beneath budding trees, breathing fresh spring air deeply. Sullivan's eyes gazed thoughtfully toward young families, children laughing and playing freely nearby. "I missed so much, Johnny," Sullivan murmured regretfully. "Your childhood, your milestones, all those years." Callahan turned gently, speaking with sincere tenderness. "Those years hurt, Dad, but look at us now. We've reclaimed something precious. Our lives aren't defined by what we missed, but by what we've rediscovered." Sullivan's eyes filled with quiet gratitude. "You've given me more than I ever thought possible. Hope, forgiveness, family. But I still struggle to forgive myself fully." Callahan grasped Sullivan's shoulder firmly, voice gentle yet strong. "That takes time, Dad. But remember, you were sick, not selfish. The father I knew always loved me deeply. That father never truly left me." Emotion overcame Sullivan, tears gently falling. I want to believe that. I'm trying every day. I know, Callahan whispered reassuringly. I see it every day. In quieter moments, Callahan reflected privately on their remarkable journey. Though complex, the renewed connection with his father felt deeply healing, filling a void he'd carried unknowingly for decades. Professionally, it reshaped his outlook. Each defendant he judged now seemed more human, struggles more nuanced, justice tempered with compassion. One evening, father and son sat quietly together, comfortably sharing silence. Sullivan finally broke it, voice soft yet thoughtful. You know, Johnny, when I was homeless, winter meant suffering and darkness. But this spring, it feels like a miracle, like rebirth. Callahan smiled warmly, glancing affectionately at his father. It is, Dad, for both of us. Sullivan nodded slowly, contemplating quietly. Maybe miracles aren't always dramatic. Maybe sometimes they're quiet, like forgiveness or second chances, or simply coming home. Callahan felt deep warmth inside, moved by his father's insight. You taught me that, Dad. Miracles aren't loud or flashy. They're real, quiet transformations, like ours. Late into the evening, conversation softened, peaceful silence wrapping comfortably around them. Outside, Manhattan glowed gently beneath early spring moonlight, city streets quiet yet alive with possibility. Inside, warmth filled every corner, the warmth of family, reconciliation, and hope. That night, as Callahan closed his eyes, he felt profound gratitude. Life had finally granted them both something priceless, a second chance neither expected but both desperately needed. For the first time in nearly 4 decades, father and son felt truly at home, not only physically, but emotionally, spiritually, connected in ways deeper than they'd ever known. Spring had arrived, not only outside their apartment, but deep within their hearts, symbolizing renewal, forgiveness, and a future built not on regret, but love. Spring deepened across Manhattan, bringing with it a gentle warmth that quietly breathed life back into the city streets. The days grew longer, trees in Central Park blossomed brilliantly, and the air held a renewed sense of possibility. Inside Judge Callahan's apartment, Robert Sullivan's transformation echoed nature's quiet revival, fragile at first, but increasingly strong and steady. With every passing week, Sullivan's confidence grew. The routine of volunteer work at the senior center became second nature. His interactions, once shy and hesitant, became relaxed and genuine. Each conversation, each smile, represented another piece of his dignity reclaimed. One bright March morning, Sullivan lingered over his coffee, lost deeply in thought. Callahan, seated across the table, studied his father's distant gaze gently. "Something on your mind, Dad?" Sullivan looked up slowly, his eyes reflecting quiet determination. "Johnny, the talks I've been giving lately, they've awakened something inside me. I want to expand this message, perhaps create something lasting, an initiative or outreach program."
Something permanent, meaningful.
Callahan nodded encouragingly, pride clear in his voice. "That sounds incredible, Dad. Your story could inspire real, lasting change." Later that afternoon, they met again with Michael Reed from the Homelessness Advocacy Center. As Sullivan passionately outlined his idea for a structured outreach program combining mental health support, mentorship, and practical aid for homeless people struggling with mental illness, Reed listened intently. "Robert, this could truly make a difference," Reed said earnestly. "We've tried similar ideas before, but the missing piece has always been someone who's lived it, someone genuine, someone the homeless community trusts. Someone like you." Sullivan hesitated momentarily, humbled yet determined. "I spent decades feeling invisible. If my experiences can help others find their voice, their dignity, then everything I've endured has purpose. Callahan watched proudly as his father spoke, seeing clearly the quiet strength and resolve Sullivan had rediscovered. Reed immediately offered full support, resources, and backing to help Sullivan build and launch the new program. Within weeks, Sullivan's vision took shape. He named it the Second Chance Project, reflecting both his own journey and the hope he wished to offer others. News of the program quickly spread, bringing local attention and soon support from across New York City. Evenings were busy now, as father and son worked side by side at the kitchen table, preparing outreach plans, volunteer schedules, and fundraising initiatives. The quiet camaraderie strengthened their bond further, bridging the gap that decades of separation had created. Yet, alongside this newfound purpose, deeper conversations arose naturally about the past, about pain, about forgiveness and healing. One quiet evening, Sullivan's voice grew somber. "Johnny, sometimes I still struggle deeply with guilt. For all the years I lost, for the way I abandoned you and your mother." Callahan paused, voice gentle yet firm. "Dad, when you left, you were sick. You didn't abandon us. You were trying to protect us. Mental illness drove your decisions, not selfishness." Sullivan sighed softly, quietly nodding. "I want to believe that, but it's still difficult." Callahan reached gently across the table, holding Sullivan's hand firmly. "Forgiving yourself takes time, Dad. But please understand this. Your leaving taught me perseverance, strength, and now, through your return, it's teaching me forgiveness. Those lessons shaped who I am, and I'm grateful for them. The past brought us pain, but it also led us to this moment right now." Sullivan's eyes filled with tears, quietly absorbing his son's powerful words. "I'm grateful too, Johnny. Grateful for you, for second chances, for forgiveness." Days grew brighter, warmer. The Second Chance Project launched publicly, gathering immediate support. Sullivan's authenticity inspired countless others, leading local newspapers to feature his remarkable story, respected judges' reunion with his homeless, mentally ill father, transforming tragedy into hope. Media attention, initially daunting, quickly turned into a platform to educate and advocate. Interviews followed, each handled carefully by Sullivan, whose sincerity and quiet dignity deeply resonated with audiences citywide. Yet, the most meaningful moments remained deeply personal. The quiet pride in Callahan's eyes as he watched his father speak publicly, Sullivan's gentle gratitude toward the volunteers who eagerly joined his mission, the handwritten letters they received from families and individuals profoundly impacted by Sullivan's courage and honesty. One particularly moving letter arrived from a woman named Catherine Daniels. "Mr. Sullivan, your story touched me deeply. My brother was homeless and struggled with schizophrenia. We lost him 2 years ago to illness and despair. Hearing you gave me hope that maybe society can change, become kinder, and wiser toward those who suffer unseen. Thank you for your courage, your honesty, and for reminding me there's still good in this world." Sullivan carefully folded the letter, visibly emotional. Callahan stood quietly beside him, gently placing a hand on his father's shoulder.
"See, Dad?
Your story matters deeply. You've turned suffering into hope." Sullivan's voice shook slightly with gratitude. "Maybe this was always meant to be, finding you, surviving it all, helping others." "Maybe," Callahan said softly. "Or maybe we've simply chosen to transform our pain into something meaningful." Late spring blossomed fully in Manhattan. Central Park filled with families, laughter, and new life. Sullivan and Callahan often walked quietly beneath flowering trees, savoring the gentle beauty around them, grateful simply to be together. One afternoon, beneath a blooming cherry tree, Sullivan paused thoughtfully. Johnny, I sometimes wonder what your mother would think if she saw us now. Callahan smiled gently, eyes tender. She'd be proud, Dad. Proud of who you've become, proud of what we've built together. She always believed you'd return someday. Sullivan's eyes filled softly with tears. I wish I could tell her how deeply sorry I am for everything. Callahan spoke quietly yet reassuringly. She knew, Dad. She understood more than either of us ever realized. Wherever she is, she's at peace, seeing us finally healed. Sullivan nodded slowly, gazing upward into softly drifting blossoms. His voice trembled slightly. I've spent a lifetime haunted by regret. But finally, Johnny, I think I'm beginning to forgive myself. Callahan placed an arm gently around Sullivan's shoulder, his voice quiet yet strong. That's the miracle we created together, Dad. The miracle of forgiveness. As spring softened into early summer, father and son continued their quiet journey forward, their lives deeply transformed, not simply through reunion, but through the powerful decision to heal and forgive. The city streets filled gradually with warmth, laughter, and renewal. Inside their home, a quiet warmth blossomed even more deeply, the warmth of family, reconciliation, and unconditional love. Summer brought a renewed vibrancy to Manhattan. Streets brimmed with life. Laughter spilled from sidewalk cafes, and Central Park's pathways filled with the sounds of children playing and couples strolling leisurely beneath lush green trees. Amidst the city's lively hum, Robert Sullivan's Second Chance project flourished, its impact quietly resonating throughout communities once neglected. Judge John Callahan found himself balancing pride with quiet astonishment at his father's transformation. Sullivan, once hesitant and frail, now spoke passionately before crowds, confidently advocating for the mentally ill and homeless. His voice carried authenticity, resonating deeply because it emerged directly from lived experience. One warm July morning, father and son stood quietly backstage at a well-attended city event promoting awareness of mental health and homelessness. Sullivan, scheduled as keynote speaker, glanced anxiously through the curtain at the packed auditorium. Callahan placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, sensing his father's nerves. You've got this, Dad. Just speak from your heart. Sullivan smiled nervously but nodded. I know, Johnny. It just never gets easier, facing all those eyes. It shouldn't be easy, Callahan replied gently. It's real, and real stories move people. I'll be right here. Sullivan took a deep breath, steadied himself, and stepped onto the stage. The crowd gradually quieted, awaiting his words. After a slight pause, he spoke softly but clearly, voice filled with quiet strength. My name is Robert Sullivan, and I spent nearly 4 decades homeless, living on these very streets, lost in the shadows of untreated mental illness. For years, society passed by, blind to my existence, as if I'd vanished from humanity entirely. The room settled into deep silence, riveted by Sullivan's sincerity. He continued steadily, courage growing with each word. But my son found me, Judge John Callahan, proving that redemption is possible. He showed me that mental illness isn't a moral failure, it's a human condition deserving empathy, support, and dignity. The crowd burst into heartfelt applause, moved deeply by his raw honesty. Afterward, many audience members approached Sullivan, sharing their own stories of lost loved ones or struggles with mental health, each grateful for his bravery. Yet, even amidst triumph, complexities arose. Public attention brought scrutiny, revealing tensions previously unseen. Some in the judicial community questioned whether Judge Callahan's personal involvement with Sullivan blurred ethical boundaries, compromising professional neutrality. Late one afternoon, Callahan received a summons from Chief Judge Margaret Henderson, head of the New York County Criminal Court. Henderson, respected but notoriously strict, invited him to her office. Anxiety stirred within Callahan as he entered her expansive chambers. "Judge Callahan, please sit," she began, expression serious yet unreadable. "You've surely noticed your father's advocacy has become prominent." "Yes," Callahan replied carefully, sensing discomfort ahead. Henderson adjusted her glasses thoughtfully. "There's growing concern among some colleagues that your father's high visibility and your direct involvement may compromise public perceptions of impartiality in your courtroom." Callahan's heart sank slightly, yet he maintained calm professionalism. "With respect, Judge Henderson, my father's advocacy is entirely separate from my judicial duties." "I believe you," Henderson replied gently. "However, perception matters greatly. The court must maintain absolute public trust. It's been suggested that you consider reassignment to civil court, away from criminal cases involving homelessness or mental health issues." Callahan sat quietly, processing this unexpected crossroads. Finally, he spoke softly but resolutely. "Judge Henderson, finding my father taught me compassion and perspective I lacked previously. Rather than weakening my impartiality, it strengthened my fairness and humanity on the bench. I respectfully ask you to reconsider." Henderson studied him carefully, expression softening slightly. "Very well. But understand clearly, this situation requires care. Public confidence must never be compromised." "I understand," Callahan replied firmly. "Thank you." That evening, Callahan shared the conversation with Sullivan, who listened carefully, visibly troubled. "Johnny, maybe my visibility is hurting your career," Sullivan began hesitantly. "I never intended." Callahan immediately interrupted gently, yet firmly. "Dad, your voice matters profoundly. What we've built matters. You deserve your platform, and I'll handle my own career. Please don't doubt yourself." Sullivan sighed quietly, visibly relieved. "Thank you, Johnny. But promise me you'll speak openly if it ever becomes too much." "I promise," Callahan replied warmly. "We'll face whatever comes together." In the weeks that followed, Callahan remained deeply conscious of potential scrutiny. Yet, professionally, his reputation quietly grew stronger. Lawyers noticed subtle yet meaningful shifts in his courtroom. Deeper compassion, balanced judgments rooted firmly in fairness rather than mere procedure. Personally, father and son continued building their fragile yet powerful bond. Summer evenings brought quiet walks through the city, casual dinners filled with laughter and storytelling, and comfortable silences that spoke volumes about the peace they discovered. One warm evening in August, as they sat quietly overlooking Central Park at sunset, Sullivan spoke thoughtfully. "Johnny, sometimes I wonder if all the pain had a purpose. Maybe it led me exactly here, exactly now with you." Callahan turned gently, voice soft yet certain. "Maybe it did, Dad. Perhaps everything we endured shaped us into exactly who we needed to become." Sullivan nodded, eyes filled with quiet gratitude. "I'm finally learning to forgive myself day by day." Callahan placed a reassuring hand gently on his father's shoulder. "Then everything we went through matters." That summer, Sullivan continued speaking widely, each talk reinforcing his message of compassion, dignity, and the healing power of second chances. Supporters multiplied, and the Second Chance Project grew stronger, touching lives far beyond initial expectations. Yet, one afternoon, a surprising letter arrived at Callahan's chambers from Governor Eleanor Reed's office, formally inviting Sullivan and Callahan to Albany. The governor sought Sullivan's advice on proposed legislation addressing mental illness among homeless populations. Reading the letter, Sullivan was speechless. "Johnny, is this real?" Callahan smiled proudly. It is, Dad. Your story is shaping history. Days later, father and son traveled quietly to Albany, where Governor Reed personally welcomed them warmly. In her office, she spoke sincerely. Mr. Sullivan, your advocacy has captured New York's heart. We'd be honored if you could advise our team as we draft this vital legislation. Sullivan, overwhelmed, nodded humbly. It would be my privilege, Governor. Returning to Manhattan afterward, Sullivan sat quietly, deeply thoughtful. Johnny, how did this happen? How did someone like me, homeless, forgotten, mentally ill, reach this moment? Callahan smiled gently, quietly emotional. Because you chose hope, Dad. Because you chose forgiveness over despair, courage over fear. Your voice matters deeply, not despite your struggles, but precisely because of them. Sullivan's eyes filled softly with tears. You believed in me when no one else did, Johnny. You gave me strength to heal. You gave that strength to yourself, Dad. Callahan replied tenderly. I simply reminded you it was always there. Summer gradually softened toward autumn, bringing fresh changes to Manhattan. Trees shifted gently into vibrant hues of red and gold, symbolizing transformation and renewal. Inside their apartment, father and son had quietly transformed as well, not simply individually but profoundly together. Outside, New York prepared gently for the changing season. Yet, inside their home, something deeper had already shifted. Father and son, having navigated unimaginable pain and found a powerful, lasting healing, prepared for whatever came next. For Robert Sullivan and John Callahan, the meaning of home had transformed. It was no longer merely a place, but something far deeper. Unconditional love, quiet redemption, and the unwavering promise of a second chance. Autumn quietly settled over Manhattan, painting the city with rich shades of amber, crimson, and gold. Leaves drifted gently from trees in Central Park, carpeting walkways with colors that whispered of change and renewal. For Robert Sullivan and Judge John Callahan, the shifting seasons reflected their own journey, one marked by profound transformation and deepening bonds. Robert's public advocacy with the Second Chance Project continued to flourish, earning attention far beyond New York City. Invitations from advocacy groups, universities, and even state policymakers began arriving regularly. Though humbled by the attention, Robert remained quietly dedicated, driven by the desire to ensure others could experience the hope and recovery he'd found. One crisp September afternoon, Robert sat at their kitchen table, holding a letter thoughtfully in his hands. Callahan arrived home early from court, immediately sensing his father's introspection. "What's on your mind, Dad?" Callahan asked gently, setting down his briefcase. Robert glanced up, a mix of pride and uncertainty in his eyes. "Johnny, the governor's office invited me to Albany again, to formally advise on expanding statewide mental health initiatives. It feels like a huge responsibility." Callahan smiled warmly, pride evident in his gaze. "Dad, that's incredible. You've earned their trust because your voice matters. Your story can create lasting change." Robert hesitated slightly, voice tinged with vulnerability. "I spent so many years believing I was worthless, invisible. Sometimes it still feels surreal, like I'm not supposed to be here." "You're supposed to be here," Callahan reassured firmly, sitting beside him. "Your journey wasn't easy, but it led exactly where you're needed most." 2 weeks later, they traveled together to Albany. In the governor's office, Robert sat humbly among prominent policymakers, sharing powerful insights shaped by his experiences. Governor Eleanor Reed listened closely, clearly moved. "Mr. Sullivan," she said warmly afterward, "your courage has truly reshaped our approach. Thank you for reminding us of our moral obligation to see humanity clearly, especially where society has been blind. Robert nodded modestly, quietly emotional. Thank you, Governor. If my experiences can help others escape the darkness, it's worth everything I endured. Returning to Manhattan, father and son reflected deeply during the quiet train ride home. Robert gazed thoughtfully out the window as the autumn landscape passed gently by, his voice soft yet certain. Johnny, today felt like the first time I truly accepted that my past mattered, not just for myself, but for others. Callahan squeezed his father's shoulder gently, speaking quietly yet powerfully. Your past has always mattered, Dad. Your strength is inspiring countless others, myself included. As autumn deepened, father and son settled into a peaceful routine at home. Quiet evenings became times for reflection and deepening emotional bonds. They frequently discussed memories of Callahan's mother, Mary, her strength, kindness, and the lingering presence of her love. One cool October night, Robert pulled a small leather notebook from a drawer, carefully placing it before Callahan. Johnny, these are letters I wrote over decades. Letters I never mailed, written in shelters, hospitals, even in parks. I've never shown them to anyone. Callahan opened the notebook slowly, eyes immediately filling with emotion as he read his father's deeply honest, heartfelt words. Dear Mary and Johnny, tonight is freezing, and I sit alone beneath a bridge again, haunted by voices and regret. I hope you're safe, Johnny, growing up strong and kind, protected by your mother's strength. Mary, forgive me for losing myself. If I survive this darkness, I promise to find you again someday. Callahan's voice trembled as he looked up, deeply moved. Dad, these letters, they show how deeply you always loved us, even at your darkest moments. Robert's eyes filled softly, voice quiet yet firm. Writing these letters kept me human, Johnny. Maybe it kept me alive. I always held on to hope that somehow, someday, you'd know how much I cared. That evening marked another milestone in their emotional reconciliation. Callahan carefully placed the letters safely away, knowing they represented not simply his father's pain, but also his profound resilience and unconditional love. Outside, autumn gradually gave way to colder November days. The air turned crisp, leaves finally abandoning the branches, leaving trees bare but beautiful. Inside their apartment, however, warmth flourished, rooted deeply in love, trust, and forgiveness. Yet, despite healing, moments of emotional fragility still occurred. Robert occasionally woke from vivid dreams, momentarily trapped in memories of homelessness and isolation. Callahan would patiently sit beside him until anxiety subsided, quietly reminding Robert of his safety and worth. One night, after a particularly vivid dream, Robert sighed softly, deeply shaken. Johnny, sometimes I fear slipping backward, losing everything again. You won't, Callahan reassured gently, voice filled with quiet confidence. You're stronger than your fears, Dad. And you're never facing them alone again. By late November, Robert's work had brought significant public recognition. The city council announced they would honor him publicly for his contributions to mental health advocacy. At City Hall, before a packed auditorium, Mayor Elizabeth Mitchell praised Robert warmly. Robert Sullivan's journey from homelessness and despair to advocacy and redemption reminds all of us that second chances matter, that compassion isn't merely noble, but necessary. Standing humbly at the podium afterward, Robert spoke quietly yet powerfully. I accept this honor not simply for myself, but for those still unseen, unheard, and lost in shadows. My story only matters if we use it to change our collective perspective, recognizing humanity where society has previously turned away. After the ceremony, Father and son walked home slowly through gently falling snow, quiet pride filling Callahan's heart. "Dad," he spoke softly, "I hope you finally see yourself as clearly as everyone else does, strong, resilient, and deeply valuable." Robert smiled gently, eyes filled with quiet gratitude. "I'm beginning to, Johnny. Day by day, thanks to you." As winter slowly approached, Robert continued his work with greater conviction, knowing he carried a profound responsibility, not merely to advocate, but to embody the very second chance he represented. At home, father and son spent peaceful evenings reflecting on their journey. Callahan quietly realized how profoundly his father's return had reshaped him, personally and professionally, revealing deeper layers of empathy, patience, and humility. One quiet evening in late November, father and son sat side by side, quietly watching snowflakes drift past their window. Robert spoke gently, thoughtfully breaking the silence. "Johnny, sometimes I wonder, do you regret finding me that day in court? All the pain I brought back into your life." Callahan immediately answered firmly yet softly, taking his father's hand. "Not for a single moment, Dad. Finding you healed something deeper than pain. It taught me forgiveness, compassion, and true justice. You've given me a chance to understand what really matters." Robert's eyes filled warmly, voice soft yet deeply sincere. "Johnny, you've given me the chance to finally forgive myself." Outside, Manhattan rested peacefully beneath a gentle snowfall. Inside, father and son shared a quiet understanding, knowing deeply that forgiveness wasn't merely given but earned together through openness, compassion, and courage. Autumn's end represented not a loss, but a powerful beginning, the gentle transformation of two lives forever intertwined by love, redemption, and hope. Winter's quiet arrival once again softened Manhattan's busy streets, casting the city in silvery stillness beneath a fresh blanket of snow. For John Callahan and Robert Sullivan, the season marked not simply a year's cycle completed, but a profound journey through healing, forgiveness, and reconciliation. One quiet evening in early December, as snow gently brushed against the windows of their apartment, Robert sat pensively beside the fireplace, turning over a worn photograph, a faded image of himself, his late wife Mary, and a very young Johnny, smiling innocently at the camera. "You are 6 years old here, Johnny," Robert murmured softly. "It was Christmas morning. Your mother made pancakes shaped like reindeer. You giggled so much you could barely eat." Callahan smiled quietly, savoring the warmth of that distant memory. "I remember that morning. Mom kept teasing you about your lopsided Santa hat." Sullivan chuckled softly, eyes warm yet wistful. "She always brought laughter and joy. After I disappeared, did she ever find happiness again?" Callahan paused thoughtfully, gently shaking his head. "Not completely, Dad. But she remained strong for me. I think she always hoped you'd return. She never stopped loving you." Sullivan's eyes filled quietly, the weight of that revelation heavy yet comforting. "Johnny, every day since I've returned, I wish I could thank her. For raising you so beautifully, for holding on to hope when I couldn't." Callahan reached across gently, squeezing his father's hand firmly. "She knows, Dad. I feel her presence all around us, in our forgiveness, in our bond. I think she's finally at peace." Even as Sullivan's public advocacy flourished, deeper private healing continued quietly at home. Despite visible strength and stability, occasional anxieties still surfaced unexpectedly, shadows from decades of pain not easily erased. Callahan remained patient, quietly supportive through difficult moments, reassuring Sullivan each time shadows of the past reappeared. One late evening, after another vivid nightmare startled Sullivan awake, Callahan quickly entered his father's room, comforting him gently as Sullivan slowly regained clarity. "I dreamed I lost you again, Johnny." "Lost everything," Sullivan whispered shakily, eyes filled with quiet fear. Callahan sat quietly beside him, speaking calmly yet tenderly. "You haven't lost me, Dad. You never will again." Sullivan sighed softly, voice trembling. "I fear these dreams will never leave me completely." "They'll fade," Callahan reassured softly. "But even if they don't completely, you'll never face them alone. Not ever again." Through quiet emotional honesty, father and son grew even closer. Conversations became deeper, richer. Both men understanding clearly that true healing required openness, vulnerability, and a willingness to confront pain honestly. One quiet Sunday morning, snow falling gently outside, Sullivan spoke thoughtfully, voice gentle yet deeply reflective. "Johnny, I've been thinking deeply about how life led me here. I used to believe I was worthless, invisible, that nothing I did mattered. But now I realize every moment of suffering gave me insight, compassion, strength. Maybe life's meaning isn't avoiding pain, but learning to transform it." Callahan nodded quietly, deeply moved. "That's exactly right, Dad. Our pain gave us empathy. Our loneliness taught us compassion. Together, we turned despair into hope." Sullivan's eyes softened quietly, voice gentle yet firm. "That's why our story matters, not simply because it's dramatic, but because it's human. We found meaning not despite suffering, but because of it." Quiet evenings brought further reflections. Callahan noticed subtle yet powerful changes in himself, his courtroom decisions increasingly guided by empathy, fairness, and deeper understanding. He realized the profound impact his father's journey had made not simply on their lives, but on countless others. One morning, Callahan arrived at his chambers to find a handwritten note waiting from Chief Judge Margaret Henderson, brief but heartfelt. "John, watching your journey over this past year inspired me deeply. Your father's courage and your compassion remind us all that true justice must be tempered with empathy and humanity. You've made this court better through your example. With sincere respect, Margaret." Callahan quietly folded the note, moved deeply. Sullivan's courage had indeed reshaped more than their personal lives. It had quietly transformed an entire community's perception of justice and humanity. As winter deepened, Christmas approached quietly. The city decorated gently, lights twinkling softly against snowfall, families gathering warmly. For Callahan and Sullivan, the holidays symbolized something far deeper than festive gatherings. A reminder of the family they'd reclaimed, the bonds strengthened through quiet forgiveness and unconditional love. Christmas Eve arrived peacefully. Father and son shared a quiet dinner at home, memories softly woven into conversations around the table. Afterward, Callahan quietly handed Sullivan a small gift, wrapped carefully in simple paper. "What's this?" Sullivan asked softly, gently curious. "Open it," Callahan said warmly, eyes gentle. Sullivan carefully unwrapped the small framed photograph, an image from decades ago, Sullivan, Mary, and young Johnny smiling warmly, frozen forever in quiet happiness. Sullivan's eyes filled softly, deeply touched. "Johnny, where did you find this?" "It was among Mom's things," Callahan replied softly. "I kept it hidden for years until today. Now, it belongs here with you, Dad." Sullivan's voice trembled gently, overwhelmed. "Thank you, Johnny. This is the greatest gift I could have received." Callahan smiled softly, voice quiet yet earnest. "Merry Christmas, Dad. This year, you finally came home." That Christmas Eve, father and son sat quietly beside the glowing tree, snow drifting gently outside their apartment window. Soft holiday music filled the peaceful silence. Both men reflected silently, deeply grateful not merely for second chances, but for something deeper, the quiet miracle of love, forgiveness, and family found again. Robert finally broke the silence gently, voice thoughtful yet firm. "Johnny, I spent decades believing redemption was impossible, that some mistakes couldn't be forgiven. But this past year taught me the most powerful lesson. Redemption isn't given or earned. It's created together, through love and courage." Callahan nodded quietly, eyes warm.
Exactly, Dad.
Redemption isn't something we wait for, it's something we build together. Late into the evening, quiet conversation softened into peaceful silence. Snow gently blanketed the city, muffling Manhattan's familiar sounds. Inside their apartment, father and son finally rested comfortably, secure, healed, forgiven. Their journey was not simply a reconciliation, it was a quiet revolution, proving profoundly that second chances existed for those brave enough to reach for them. For John Callahan and Robert Sullivan, Christmas meant more than holidays. It was a reminder that no life was beyond redemption, no bond too fractured to mend, no journey too difficult to complete together. With winter gradually loosening its hold, spring quietly returned to New York City, softly thawing streets and sidewalks, waking dormant branches to life with gentle whispers of renewal. For Judge John Callahan and his father, Robert Sullivan, this spring symbolized more than seasonal change. It represented the profound fulfillment of a journey toward redemption and healing. Robert Sullivan had become a respected figure, his advocacy for homeless and mentally ill individuals resonating deeply across communities. The Second Chance Project thrived, gaining widespread support. Yet, more important than public recognition was the quiet, internal peace Sullivan had finally achieved. The painful shadows that had haunted him for decades now lingered quietly in the background, acknowledged but no longer overwhelming. Early one April morning, father and son walked slowly through Central Park beneath blossoming cherry trees, soft pink petals gently drifting around them. Sullivan paused thoughtfully, breathing deeply, savoring the peaceful moment. "Johnny," he said softly, "there was a time when spring meant nothing to me. The seasons blurred together, just endless survival. But now it feels beautiful, like a promise kept." Callahan smiled warmly, eyes reflecting quiet affection. "This spring symbolizes exactly what we built, Dad. Hope, renewal, and the power of second chances." Sullivan nodded quietly, deeply grateful. "Exactly, Johnny. I finally realized forgiveness wasn't just a word. It was a process, something we created patiently together." Their bond now carried quiet strength, shaped by honesty, compassion, and mutual understanding. Every painful memory shared, every vulnerable moment navigated, had woven them closer, creating a family stronger for all they'd endured. Privately, Callahan felt profoundly changed by their journey. As a judge, he now approached every case with deeper humanity, seeing not merely facts or circumstances, but stories filled with complexity, pain, hope, and the potential for redemption. The courtroom had quietly transformed from merely a place of judgment into a place of nuanced compassion. One morning in early April, Chief Judge Margaret Henderson summoned Callahan again. This time, her voice was warm and gentle, respect evident. "Judge Callahan, your recent handling of cases involving mental illness and homelessness has deeply impressed me," she began thoughtfully. "Your decisions show remarkable compassion balanced carefully with fairness and integrity. You've reminded us all of the human heart behind justice." Callahan nodded humbly. "Thank you, Judge Henderson. This year taught me more than I could have imagined. not just professionally, but personally. Henderson smiled gently. It shows, John. Keep letting compassion guide your judgments. It's what the justice system truly needs. That evening, father and son quietly celebrated together at home, reflecting deeply on their journey's impact, not simply on their own lives, but on countless others. Johnny, Sullivan spoke softly, gently emotional. Your decision to forgive, to reconnect with me, it didn't just save my life. It gave meaning to decades of pain. You've changed countless lives by giving me this chance. Callahan shook his head gently, eyes warm. You changed your own life, Dad. I simply reminded you how deeply you mattered. You were never truly lost, just waiting to be found again. Spring quietly unfolded, bringing gentle, peaceful days filled with meaningful conversations, quiet laughter, and shared experiences. Yet both men understood their journey's ultimate lesson clearly now. Forgiveness and redemption weren't sudden miracles. They were choices made daily through courage, humility, and love. One particularly peaceful April morning, father and son sat quietly together, sipping coffee in the soft glow of morning sunlight streaming gently through apartment windows. Silence stretched comfortably, filled deeply with unspoken gratitude for the bond they'd quietly rebuilt. Finally, Callahan spoke softly yet earnestly. Dad, sometimes I wonder, had you never walked into my courtroom, would we have ever found each other again? Sullivan smiled gently, voice soft yet certain. I don't know, Johnny, but maybe life has a way of quietly guiding us back to where we truly belong. Callahan nodded thoughtfully. Maybe so. All I know for sure is that finding you taught me life's greatest lesson. Justice without compassion is incomplete. Forgiveness is more powerful than resentment. Sullivan smiled gently, eyes filled warmly with gratitude. And you've taught me that no one's past defines them forever. Second chances aren't just possible, they're essential. Quietly, father and son shared understanding born from mutual wisdom, vulnerability, and strength. Outside, Manhattan gently awakened beneath warm spring sunlight. Yet inside their home, something even brighter quietly shone. A bond rebuilt carefully, patiently, from pain into something deeply beautiful and lasting. Later that afternoon, Callahan quietly entered his chambers at the courthouse, pausing thoughtfully. On his desk, beside neatly stacked case files, sat a framed photo, Sullivan and Callahan standing side by side, smiling warmly beneath Central Park's blossoming trees. Callahan picked it up gently, eyes quietly emotional. In that moment, clarity settled deeply within him. His life's greatest achievements weren't the judgments he'd delivered from the bench, nor the accolades he'd earned professionally. They were quiet, personal moments like these, born of forgiveness, reconciliation, and unconditional love. Outside, Manhattan bustled gently, people moving busily through city streets unaware of the quiet miracles occurring daily around them. Miracles shaped not through grand gestures, but small acts of courage, empathy, and compassion. Callahan now understood profoundly that these quiet moments carried life's greatest truths, justice's deepest wisdom, and humanity's truest meaning. That evening, father and son sat quietly on their apartment balcony, overlooking Manhattan gently glowing beneath early evening lights. Sullivan finally broke their peaceful silence, voice quiet yet deeply thoughtful. Johnny, he murmured softly, when you first brought me home, I feared everything was temporary, like a dream that would vanish. But now I finally understand this life we've built together. It's permanent, real. Callahan smiled softly, gently placing a reassuring hand on Sullivan's shoulder. It is real, Dad, and you earned every moment of it. Sullivan's eyes filled warmly with quiet gratitude, voice softly sincere. Johnny, thank you for teaching me forgiveness, compassion, dignity, and for giving me back my humanity. Callahan smiled warmly, voice gently earnest. Thank you, Dad, for teaching me patience, resilience, humility, and the true meaning of family. Inside their home, peaceful silence filled every corner. Outside, sunlight gently warmed Manhattan streets, the city alive with quiet hope and renewal. Father and son had transformed their deepest pain into profound healing, their darkest memories into powerful redemption. Theirs was a journey defined not merely by reconciliation, but by love's profound strength, the quiet certainty that family, forgiveness, and second chances could heal even the deepest wounds, allowing broken lives to finally become whole again.